What's up, everybody? Welcome to some Obzedat Ghost Council. Yeah, I wanted to highlight this particular commander because he's being printed in Modern Masters 17. So let's say you drafted your local gaming store, you draft online, and you end up with a copy of Obzedat, and you don't know where to go with them. Look no further. Here we are. Yeah, we've got this particular build of Obzedat. What we're looking to do is it's a little bit aristocrats, and it's a little bit kind of taxing style effects, and pretty fun deck. It's pretty open. It's definitely one of those commander decks that it's not the same line of play every single time where it's like tutor for this, grab this, do this, and then you win the game. Pretty much every single game you play this deck is always going to be different, and that's what kind of makes it so fun. Or that's why I personally really enjoy playing aristocrat style decks or black-white decks like this that are you just always have a good time playing them, win or lose. So, and this deck comes in at about 50 tickets, which is not too bad. And also, depending on your budget, if you need to cut some of the mana base to make it a little bit cheaper, go for it. And then if you're building it in real world, obviously just scale back to your budget. But yeah, it comes in at 50 tickets online, which is not too bad for a commander deck. It's just a little bit out of the budget range. I would consider a budget commander deck around between $30 and $50, but I think it comes in actually at about 55 tickets. But still a really fun deck to play. But let's jump into the actual deck tech itself. Actually, let's cover Obzedat, then we're going to jump into the deck. So let's start off with Obzedat. So whenever he enters the battlefield, target opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Then for the second ability, at the beginning of your end step, you may exile Obzedat. If you do, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next upkeep. So basically, you get down Obzedat, you exile it at the end of the turn, it comes back. At the beginning of your turn, it has haste, but every time it's going to be coming back, you're going to get those enter the battlefield triggers for 2 life, and you gain 2 life. They recently changed the rules for dual commander from 40 to 30 life, so something like this Obzedat trigger getting in here is definitely kind of going to add up over time, especially if it's coming down with haste. It's always good to get that the 2 life and then losing 2 life up and running. But what we're doing to accompany this enter the battlefield trigger is we're running aristocrats, and when you start off with aristocrats, you have your sack outlets. So let's start off with Viscerous here. Pretty simple. Sacrifice a creature, scry 1. The scry 1's nice, but most of the time we're just using it to clear our board of creatures and get those Blood Artist triggers. The next one we're running is Ailey, Eternal Pilgrim. She has Death Touch, 1 colorless, sacrifice another creature, you gain life equal to that sacrifice creature's toughness. Then for 3 mana, sacrifice another creature, exile target non-land permanent, activate this ability only if you have 10 or more life than your starting life total. So let's say we've got 5 creatures out there, we have a couple Blood Artist type effects, we start sacrificing these creatures, next thing you know we get ahead on our life total, we can start activating Ailey and sacrificing our creatures. We're also running Bloodthorn Vampire, just another solid base sacrifice outlet. Sacrifice a creature, Bloodthorn Vampire gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Let's say we're casting a Living Death and we need to get everything into the graveyard that we can. Having a sack outlet like Bloodthorn Vampire allows us to sacrifice herself to her own ability and get her into the graveyard. So that's what you're looking for in some of these sack outlets. Like if you compare Viscerous Seer, sacrifice a creature, so we can sacrifice Viscerous Seer to itself to get into the graveyard. But if you look at Ailey, it says sacrifice another creature, and the same thing with both abilities, sacrifice another creature. So if we're casting a Living Death and we sack our creatures to get some Blood Artist triggers, and then we'll have enough to close the game out once they all come back out of the graveyard. You always want to have a sack outlet that's at least going to go to the graveyard with your Living Death. So just looking ahead. We're also running Hidden Stockpile. So it has Revolt at the beginning of your, basically Revolt says if a permanent you control left the battlefield, then do something this turn. So if we have Revolt active at the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact token. So this is going to be a way for us to start sacrificing some of our creatures to take advantage of some of our other cards. And then if we get that Revolt active, we're going to be getting those colorless servo artifact tokens. Then we can sacrifice, basically is once we get something up and running, those servo tokens, we can pay 1, sack a creature, and scry 1. So basically every turn we're going to have a servo token to sacrifice and get that scry up and running if we need to dig for something. Also keeping with the sacrifice thing, we're running Diabolic Intent. As an additional cost to cast it, sacrifice a creature, then search your library for a card and put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library. This card's like, I think $15 in paper, but online it's only about $1 or 50 cents or something like that. So that's why we're running it in here, but it's just really cool, and it's on flavor with the deck where we're sacrificing a creature, searching up exactly what we need, and it's just a pretty cool little tutor effect. Oh, and also it's a good way to get a creature card in the graveyard if you don't have a sack outlet, and for some reason you need that. Then we're also running Reprocess. I don't know why the card art doesn't show up on this one, but it's been like that ever since I picked it up. Sacrifice any number of artifact creatures and or lands, draw a card for each permanent sacrifice this way. So let's say we're deploying all of our creatures. We're running like 38 creatures in this deck. Let's say we've got 10 creatures out there. We cast a Reprocess, sacrifice sacrificing 10 creatures. They're all going to go to the graveyard, and then hopefully that's going to allow us to draw 10 cards and dig for maybe something like a Living Death or a Rally of the Ancestors, kind of rinse and repeat, and sacrifice the rest of our creatures. We're also running Eliminate the Competition. As an additional cost to cast Eliminate the Competition, sacrifice X creatures, destroy X target creatures. So basically this is, once again, if we're looking to get creatures in the graveyard, we can clean up some of our opponent's creatures or their bigger creatures, and we're just running so many value creatures in here that we can afford to sacrifice them, especially if we can kind of dig for that Living Death. Now, Sacrifice Outlets would not be complete without a Blood Artist. One of my favorite cards in Magic. Blood Artist. So whenever Blood Artist or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So you can get into the spot to, let's say we've got 10 creatures on our side of the board with the Blood Artist, and our opponent has 10 creatures on their side of the board, and we cast like a board wipe or something that's going to kill all the creatures. Blood Artist is going to trigger for each single creature. So there's going to be 20 Blood Artist triggers. Our opponent's going to lose 20 life and we're going to gain 20 life. So you can see where having a sack outlet and sacking your creatures to get these Blood Artist triggers on the stack is actually pretty important. And something like a Living Death or a Graveyard Recursion to bring everything back out of the graveyard to rinse and repeat with the Sack Outlet and Blood Artist is definitely a pretty easy way to close the game out. We're also running Zulaport Cutthroat. It's kind of just a more redundancy. Zulaport does not trigger for our opponent's creatures, so if you cast like a board wipe or something, it's not going to trigger for whenever their creatures die. But whenever one of our creature dies or Zulaport dies, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So that covers our sacrificing and our Blood Artist triggers. Now let's go on to the taxing effects. We're running, well, taxing in like a positive and negative way. Running Soul Warden, so whenever another creature enters the battlefield, which counts for us or our opponent, we're going to gain 1 life. This is a really good way for us if we're playing against an aggro style deck to kind of stabilize, get down Soul Warden, or if we're being aggressive with some of our card draw, we can gain that life and kind of get ahead on life total. We're also running Suture Priest, so whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control, we gain a life. Excuse me, let me rephrase that. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control, we gain a life. Then, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our opponent's control, we may have that player lose 1 life. So if they're getting out, maybe they're making some tokens or something like that, we can combine this taxing effect with some Blood Artist style effects to kind of help close the game. That's kind of the game plan, this deck in a nutshell, is we're looking to get as many of these taxing style effects out there to either get into a spot where we can close the game out because we have so much life gained, or we can make them lose enough life to where they're going to lose the game. We're also running Athreos, God of Passage. Pretty easy to get devotion online for Athreos with how many creatures we're running, and our commander has 4 devotion in it, so to begin with. So as soon as we get down Athreos and Obzedat, we're looking at 6 devotion, so we just need 1 more creature to turn Athreos online. And Athreos, you know, we'll cover Athreos. It has Indestructible, devotion 7, white or black turns into a creature. Then whenever another creature we control dies, return it to our hand unless target opponent pays 3 life. And it's a 5/4, it has Indestructible. So it's kind of, most of the time, you know, we're going to use that Athreos ability to bring a creature back to our hand, but most of the time you just go 5/4 Indestructible Beat Stick to really kind of get some nice little put a lot of pressure on our opponent with that. 5/4 body over there. We're also running Fiend Hunter. Now this is where it gets kind of tricky with the sack outlet. So Fiend Hunter, whenever it enters the battlefield, you may exile a target creature. Then its second ability says whenever he leaves the battlefield, return that exiled card to its owner's control. So if you have a sack outlet, you cast Fiend Hunter, it's going to come into the battlefield and it's going to exile target creature. With that on the stack, you activate a sack outlet, sacrificing Fiend Hunter. Then his second ability goes on the stack that says, hey, give that creature back. There's no creature was taken, so that ability resolves. They don't get a creature back. And then his first ability says, exile target creature, exiles that creature for good. So this is also one of those cards that it's good to have in there, but you need to also understand that if you have a sack outlet in there, you can get a free exile by sequencing it on the stack. If that doesn't make sense, just kind of go back and listen to it. But basically, he enters the battlefield, his first trigger goes on the stack, you sacrifice in response to that, his second ability goes on the stack, that resolves, and then his first ability resolves, and you just get a free exile. So it's just important to know that if you're running a sack outlet and Fiend Hunter, how to sequence that. And then actually the exact same thing for Tide Hollow. He's going to enter the battlefield, target opponent reveals his or her hand, and you get to exile that card. Then whenever he leaves the battlefield, you have to give that card back if he gets destroyed. So same thing, he enters the battlefield, that trigger on the stack, you sacrifice, his second ability goes on the stack, that resolves, and you get to exile a card for free. So definitely just something you need to be aware of if you're running in a deck with a sack outlet. And we're also running Kambal, Council of Allocation. So whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, that player loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So you can kind of see where if we have Kambal out there, we have the Suture Priest, they're getting creatures out there. Next thing you know, they're losing anywhere from 3 to 5 points of damage each turn, and that can definitely kind of close the game out for you. So that's our taxing effects, including Obzedat. And we have stuff that cares about stuff dying. So we're running Scourge Stag High Priest. So whenever basically if we get Morbid online, tap 2 untapped creatures you control, create a 5/5 black demon creature token with flying. So we have a lot of sack outlets in here. We have a lot of creatures we want to get into the graveyard. If you can get down Scourge Stag High Priest and get into the spots where you can start activating and get those 5/5 demons, pretty good, man. It'll definitely kind of change the game for you, especially if they don't have any removal for it. So getting that online is a really good card. It's just value. We're looking to get stuff in the graveyard and just get those demons running. We're also running Extractor of Sin. So whenever he enters the battlefield, sacrifice another permanent. If you do create a 3/2 colorless Eldrazi Horror token, then if we have Delirium active, which we're getting a lot of stuff in the graveyard, transform it. Eldrazi you control have Vigilance, and then for 2 mana, sacrifice a non-Eldrazi creature, create a 3/2 colorless Eldrazi Horde creature token. Most of the time we're not going to be able to get into the spot to where we're going to have it flipped, but simply having it enter the battlefield, we can sacrifice a creature to turn into a 3/2. Let's say that it's Viscera Seer or something like that. Turning it into a 3/2 Eldrazi is pretty nice sometimes to kind of have that. We're also running Lilliana. If it'll go over there, there we go. There we go. Lilliana, she has lifelink. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, exile Lilliana, return her to the battlefield under owner's control. If you do create a 2/2 black zombie token, then she turns into a planeswalker once that happens. Each player, +2, each player discards a card, -X, return target non-legendary creature with converted mana cost X from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then -8, which is a really fun thing, a really fun ultimate to go for. You get an emblem that says whenever a creature dies, return to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step. Doesn't matter if your creature or opponent's creature, you get that back. I've gotten into a spot to where I get a Liliana ultimate, and I like playing graveyard style decks, so it's definitely probably one of my favorite Planeswalker ultimates to get her online. And it's really not that hard to get her to flip because we're running a bunch of sack outlets. All we have to do is just have one of our creatures die. She's going to come back, and we're going to get a 2/2 zombie body to kind of protect her. So really good in the deck. This is one of those. I don't know exactly what her price is, but at a budget point, if you need to cut her, you could definitely do that. We're also running Atherid Necromancer. So whenever Atherid Necromancer or another human creature you control dies, which we're running a lot of humans in this deck, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So you can see where we have the Necromancer out there. We have maybe 5 humans. We're sacrificing them to get some Blood Artist triggers, and we're replacing each creature with a zombie token. So basically, it's kind of a way for us to amplify the number of creatures that we're doing, and at the same time increasing those Blood Artist triggers. We're also running Disciple of Bolas, really good way just to get something in the graveyard and get some card draw and gain some life. So whenever he enters the battlefield, sacrifice another creature. If you do, you gain X life, draw X card, where X is that creature's power. So once again, it's a good way just to get something in the graveyard and draw a few cards and kind of get advantage of it. Now onto the Payoff Spell, stuff that rewards us for getting stuff into the graveyard. We're running Living Death. So each player exiles all creature cards from his or her graveyard, then sacrifices up. Basically, what's going to happen is whatever creatures you have on the battlefield, they go to the graveyard. Whatever stuff you have in the graveyard goes to the battlefield. So let's say that we have a sack outlet, we have Blood Artists, and we have a few creatures. We sacrifice them. Let's say our opponent's at 20. We get enough Blood Artist triggers where they go down to 10. We cast Living Death. Everything comes back out. Then we re-sacrifice them and get them down to 0. So that's kind of the game plan. You're looking to slowly deploy stuff out, get them into the graveyard, and then bring everything back for one nice big swing. So really good card. And you can also use Living Death in a kind of a like a cautionary, kind of more of a board wipe in a way. Let's say that you don't have a lot of creatures out and your opponent has a ton of creatures out. You can swap graveyards and kind of change the game into your favor. We're also running Rally the Ancestors, which is really good instant speed. Return each creature card with converted mana cost X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Exile those creatures at the beginning of your next upkeep. So basically, if you're going to cast Rally, you don't want your creatures to get exiled. You're going to get into a spot to where hopefully you have a sack out in your graveyard and you can sack your creatures and get them back in the graveyard, because once they're in the graveyard, Rally doesn't care where they are. If they're on the battlefield, they want it gone. But once it leaves into the graveyard, you're good to go with that Rally the Ancestors. So we covered the taxing effects, creatures that care about stuff dying. Oh, we're also running Debt to the Deathless. It's just a really good card in here. Each opponent loses 2 times X life, and you gain life equal to the life lost this way. So this is really just a good spell to, if we can't close it out with Blood Artists and Zulaport triggers, this is a good way for us to kind of just get that nice little final push to kind of gain that life and make our opponent lose that life. That's it as far as the taxing and stuff. Just kind of cover some of the utility creatures that we're running. Running Pack Rat, awesome discard outlet for the graveyard. And plus, getting down a Pack Rat, it's equal to the number of rats you control. Then for 3 mana, discard a card, create a token that's a copy of Pack Rat. So Excuse me. This is a good way to put stuff into the graveyard. Say we need a Blood Artist in the graveyard, and at the same time we're getting Pack Rat, and if they can't deal with the original Pat Rat quick enough, eventually you can just get into spots where you can keep making it each turn and build up a nice little rat army. It's always fun building a rat army. We're also running Selfless Spirit. Sacrifice it. Creatures you control gain indestructible. Let's say we need to make an alpha swing, swinging in, and we can give them indestructible, not worry about losing our creatures. We're running the Handwear Militia Captain. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 4 or more creatures, which we're running 38 in here, so it's going to be pretty easy to get to that. Flipper, Transformer. Then her power and toughness are equal to the number of creatures you control. Then, at the beginning of your instep, create a 1/1 white and black human cleric creature token. So it's always fun getting that token up and running. Pretty cool. We're also running Bygone Bishop. This is, man, solid commander card in a deck like this. It has flying. Whenever you cast a creature spell, will convert him to cost 3 or less. We're going to get Investigate. And if you don't know what Investigate is, it's basically create a clue token. 2 colorless mana, sack it, draw a card. So really good. It's just worth its weight in gold in this deck. Turning all your creatures into an extra 2 mana, draw a card. Pretty good. Running Mentor of the Meek. This is if you get Mentor of the Meek online and just getting those creatures out, paying 1 to draw a card, you get some pretty crazy card advantage. Since we're running so many humans in here, we're running Devout Chaplain. Tap 2, untap humans in control, exile target artifact or enchantment. So since we're running so many creatures, we kind of have to run certain utility creatures that allow us to deal with certain things, and the Devout Chaplain is definitely one of those ways. We're also running Burnished Heart, 3 mana. White-black's really not that good for ramping, so definitely a really good card in the deck. 3 colorless mana, sacrifice it, search your library for up to 2 basic lands, put on the battlefield tap, so pretty good. And plus it goes to the graveyard, which allows us to bring it back out for a few Blood Artist triggers. Then running a little bit of removal, running Merciless Executioner. Each player sacks a creature, and then the Fleshbag Marauder. Each player sacrifices a creature. Keeping on point with that. We're also running the Singar Autocrat. So whenever he enters the battlefield, create 3/0/1 black serf tokens. Then when he leaves, exile all serf tokens. The 0/1s aren't really going to matter other than just basically he counts as 4 creatures. So let's say we need to get into spots where we're adding up how many creature cards we have in the graveyard. We're seeing how many Blood Artist type effects that we have. He's going to count for 4 because when he comes into the battlefield, he's going to count for himself and he's going to create those 3/0/1 black serf tokens. So that's going to be 4 bodies that you can count towards your Blood Artist count. So really good card. We're also running Ravos Soul Tender. He has flying. Other creatures you control get +1/+1. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, you may return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Just solid card. Getting that nice little bonus for everybody is always really good, and then being able to kind of hand select cards out of the graveyard is a really good thing. We're also running the Unhallowed, Micaius the Unhallowed. He has Intimidate, and whenever a human deals damage to you, destroy it. And then other non-human creatures you control get +1/+1 and have Undying. We're running a few non-human stuff in here, but having that Undying, it's in a spot to where if it's in the graveyard, or we can give everybody that +1/+1 bonus to kind of swing in pretty good. We're also running as a little bit of a last resort Demon of Dark Scheme. So we have a lot of creatures that are converted that have the power toughness of 2. So whenever he enters the battlefield, all other creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. Then whenever a creature dies, you get 1 energy. So you can kind of use this as a way to kind of get a bunch of stuff into the graveyard for a living death, or if you don't have a sack outlet for some reason, you can use this to get a bunch of stuff into the graveyard for a living death, or Rally the Ancestors. And then you have all that energy to where you can pay 3 mana and 4 energy at basically instant speed because it's an activated ability, not a tap ability. You can put target creature card from a graveyard, which is both our and our opponent's graveyard, under the battlefield under your control. So it's a really good utility creature for a deck like this. It's a board wipe in a pinch, and you get all that energy. You can start reanimating stuff out of the graveyard. That covers the utility creatures. I think that's about it as far as our creatures go. This deck does come in at about 50 tickets. So obviously, if you have some of the cards, it shouldn't cost you that much to kind of throw this deck together. But if you're buying into the deck, just look at your budget. Yeah, one of the first things that you can do is start at the mana base and just kind of chip away some of those more expensive mana cards. It's going to dilute the power of the deck, but it's definitely one way that you can kind of get stuff up and running, or some of the tutors and stuff like that. Kind of cut those away, or maybe find replacements that work with your budget. But yeah, it comes in at 50 tickets, which is kind of about what you're looking to at least spend on a commander deck, at least a entry-level commander deck, and then definitely leaves room for upgrades. So yeah, that should be the deck tech in a nutshell. I have some gameplay videos for you, so be sure and check those out. And if you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. Thanks.